Hi everyone, thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to take a look at an extended wrist position, extended lead wrist position, to be more precise, at the top of the backswing. Before we go into any judgment of whether it's a good or bad movement to really see in the golf swing, it is worth considering that we do see all different types of wrist positions out on the PGA Tour. So there's players out there with slightly extended wrist positions at the top, and then others that have slightly flexed wrist positions, and guys that look somewhere in the middle where it's more neutral. So you can play golf, good golf, from different positions there at the top of backswing. It does relate more to how you move other areas throughout the body, whether that will work for you or not. So very much an individual thing. Okay, so reason I've done this though is there are a number of times for players getting that wrist into an extended position doesn't have a good influence on the golf shots, purely because typically what that would do is open the face, and then as the player comes into downswing, the face is wide open, so they have to work to close it coming into impact. I'm going to go over two common movement patterns that I see in players that often lead to that extended position at the top. So if this is something you're looking to correct or play around with in your own swing, keep watching. You might fit into one of these two categories. These are probably the two most common movement patterns I see that leads that extended position. Okay, so first pattern that I see actually relates to how the player moves very early on in backswing. So if we go back to a little bit of biomechanics and we look at the movement around the forearm here, coming from the elbow, the pronation and supination of this forearm. Okay, so typically I think a good reference is if someone had a watch on it. If I was to have a lot of pronation at any point in backswing, you would see the watch get to the sky, and then typically when someone does that pattern, then they're going to want to move the club upwards, and they add that movement there around the lead wrist and move it into extension, so you see that extended position at the top. So watch goes to the sky, too much pronation, and then as it works up, then you see that extended wrist position there. That's something that I've played around with myself. Had a lot of high level players have a little bit of that pattern in their swings as well. So a couple of simple keys to help a few players that if you think that may be you. First of all, if there is too much pronation in the start of the swing through this lead arm, it's always worth considering just checking your setup and making sure that you're free to rotate through this upper spine very cleanly. If that's a little bit fixed, that could be a compensatory pattern. Okay, but assuming that in setup and everything's moving well, what we're going to look to do is in this first move here, keep the watch facing more out. That's going to imagine if the watch was to the sky where the club head would be, that's when we would add that to kind of try and steepen the shaft. Okay, so that's if the watch was to the sky. So fix here, you could even put right hand on the outside here, make sure that the forearm stay more out. You'll notice the difference in where the sweet spot is. When I do this move here, and I keep that more passive there, that rotation through there, that club head feels like it's almost lining up with my lead shoulder. And that's obviously assuming that I've made a nice rotation through here as well. When I first started working on this feel, it actually felt as though the club head was even outside it. That's how extreme it felt to me. It felt like I was going from here to over here. Obviously very different feeling to take to your golf swing. Okay, so instead of pronation, then to the top with a cut wrist, we're gonna go passive through the rotation here, watch faces that way, club more in front, and then from there when we go to the top, you can see it puts the wrist in quite a different position there. Okay, so that's the one that I've got personal experience of working on there, just reducing the amount of pronation in the lead arm. Second pattern that I see is more of a takeaway sequence, and again, check your setup if you feel like this might be you, because it could be just a restriction from how you're standing at address. But essentially, instead of the takeaway sequence where we want the club, the hands, arms, work down through the spine, through the rib cage, then the pelvis working, you're going to see almost an inverse of that. So there's going to be a very dominant body move early on, and it actually leaves the club head a little bit behind in the takeaway. And you can see when I do that, it puts the extension in that lead wrist very early. And just to show you down the line what typically matches with that, so very early with the body from a sequencing standpoint, and then from there I often see a little bit of a drag, and then because of the poor rotation at the start, a little bit of lift and the arm gets across. Okay, so just to go over that one more time, sequence is not good, body moves a bit early, leaves the club head behind, we're in extension there, the club drags out because of the poor rotation then of the body, the arms and the body lift, and we get into that lead wrist being a little bit extended there at the top as well. So that is the second pattern. And then simply going back to that one, with plays where we'll just start is just from getting in a good setup position, working towards club head moves a lot more in the first 2 feet. Good reference from there is at about 2 feet back, but the club is pointing around left hip, as opposed to that kind of move there where there's a bit of a drag and it's pointing more towards right hip. So let the club head move more, pull the club to left hip. Then from there, slowly allow the rib cage to move a little bit more. So even at this point here, we're halfway through backswing, you can see how much calmer the lower body is from that move to something like this. Yep, you can see how the knees haven't moved a ton. There's just a tiny little bit of movement. So essentially we're keeping that lower body a lot calmer as we're allowing a nice sequence. And they're the 2 patterns that I see the most with this. So if I was to just go back to the one that I worked on myself, getting the lead forearm to just really settle down a little bit in how it was moving at the start. If I go back to my personal experience, it was being restricted from a rotational standpoint how I stood. So I would actually stand sitting a little bit back into this right hip here, and then be a little bit compressed on this side here, and have my shoulders a little bit too much this way, excuse me. And then going into the swing, I was restricted on this right side, so I would add a little bit of this to get the club into a nice area in space where I could manage the weight of it. But then obviously as I moved through backswing, that's when I added that little bit of cup. So for me, I had to make that a little bit of adjustment in my setup. It was actually a little knee position adjustment as well, along with the pelvis, to make sure I stood really well through lower body. And then from there, I could work on that feel to there, that to there, keep feeling that. I can actually feel the wrist position actually feels quite different. But from there, it was a lot easier to get that club coming from a good spot with the face in a good angle. So try and hit one for you now. This is something I focus on quite a lot. Not a bad one there, but it really has helped me actually addressing that for me, that position at the top of the lead wrist, to just get that club in a stronger position come in, and it's really helped me to actually continue to rotate through the shot. So the top of the wrist, the top of the swing wrist position, once again, really personal to the individual. For me though, it has helped just to work on that movement through our backswing, and just get it a little bit less extended coming into the downswing.